We will stand on the highest ground, and we'll sing our Spurs to glory. For the dream we share, we will achieve, as long as we believe.
We will stand on the highest ground, and we'll sing our Spurs to glory. For the dream we share, we will achieve, as long as we believe. From the darkest valley, shine together in our darkest hours, side by side, a million wide till victory is ours, till victory is ours. We will stand on the highest ground, and we'll sing our Spurs to glory. For the dream we share, we will achieve, as long as we believe. On the highest ground, and we'll sing our Spurs to glory. For the dream we share, we will achieve, as long as we believe. Oh, yes, we
Goosebumps. Now, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another edition of the Spurs Chat podcast. The song that you just heard there is called Believe, the Tottenham Hotspur victory anthem, inspired by Tottenham Hotspur boss Ange Postecoglou, by the Tottenham Believers, featuring Andy Seymour, and words and music by Adrian Tisato. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Adrian today to talk about the new song, to discuss all things Tottenham Hotspur, and of course, Ange Postecoglou. Before I talk to Adrian, though, we would like to invite your comments and your feelings right now on the club. Europa League winners 2025. What is next for Spurs, though? And also let us know what you think of the song. Adrian, great to have you with us. How are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm very well. How are you?
Very good. I haven't stopped smiling in the last couple of weeks. It's been a fantastic couple of weeks. But tell us all about this new song. How did it happen, Adrian? I know that you are a big, big fan of Ange Postecoglou. I know during this podcast we will talk a lot about Ange and especially about his future. But how did this song come about?
Well, Chris, I mean, I've been writing songs since I was a teenager. I used to be in a band. I mean, I went on and became a lawyer, which is what I do now, but it's always been something I do. Work with other artists and write with others, and sometimes write for myself. Sometimes other artists record my songs. Sometimes I put things out myself. But this song emanated from something quite sort of momentary, really. Ange Postecoglou, in his first season, when things were starting to get quite difficult, about 2/3 into the season, we'd lost players to injury. We had suspensions after the infamous 11th game against Chelsea. And the narrative began to emerge among journalists, among supporters, that he didn't have a plan B. Essentially, he had one way of playing, and it had been figured out by other managers, and kind of the game or the show or the trick was up, essentially. And he was asked a question in a press conference along those lines about that issue. And he said, do you think that same question wasn't asked of me at Celtic and at Yokohama and before then? And then he kind of had a bit of a, as he does sometimes, a bit of a testy exchange with the journalist. And then he said, look, I'll answer it for you. And then he then said, I believe what I believe. I really do, down to my core. I will stand on the highest ground, die a noble death, believing in what I believe. And it really resonated with me simply because you just don't hear managers speak in those terms, typically. I've found that Postecoglou over the years, I've followed his career since he was first coaching, and even when he was a player, he was a very good player. He was a captain of his club at 21 years of age, won a national title in Australia. He's always been a winner, and he's always been an innovator. So when he talked about belief in those terms, it really struck me because what I have really felt as a Tottenham supporter for many years is that what we've lacked is belief. There's been a lot of managerial changes over a long period of time. We were always a cup side, and we were incredible in the cups. Until 91. We pretty much won every FA Cup we were in. I think we might have won every single FA Cup final we were in, Chris. You probably know that stat better than me. But I remember that we were always kind of up and down as a side in the league. But we always had these glorious cup runs, and that was kind of the story of Tottenham. So here he was under pressure in a press conference, really where people already were questioning his pedigree. He's only come from Celtic, which is a 2-team competition, was the narrative. And before that, he was in Japan and Australia, which are Mickey Mouse leagues, was the narrative. So I guess when he said, I will stand on the highest ground and die a noble death, it kind of had an almost Shakespearean element to it. And I think pretty much straight away I picked up the acoustic guitar and just started to play with those words. And it started out with, I will stand on the highest ground. And then I guess the next thing that really struck me was that most football supporter songs are repurposed popular tunes. So in other words, there's an existing popular tune and it gets borrowed, but the words get changed, and they might sing about a manager or a player or make fun of the opposition. And I've always envied Liverpool because they've got this song that they sing before the kickoff at Anfield, You'll Never Walk Alone. And so I looked into the history of how You'll Never Walk Alone became Liverpool's anthem. It's not, so it's not a repurposed tune, it's actually an original tune. But it wasn't for Liverpool or of Liverpool. It was actually a song in an American musical written by Rodgers and Hammerstein called Carousel from years earlier. So here was this American song, which was a rousing tune with these beautiful lyrics. And my understanding of what happened was that Jerry and the Pacemakers recorded it in the early 1960s. And at that time when sort of Beatlemania was happening and Liverpool seemed to be the centre of the cultural world with other groups, they're all being produced by George Martin and managed by Brian Epstein. And that song came out, and I think it went to #1. And at the time, they were playing the whatever was in the top 10 at the time. They'd play those tunes before the kickoff at Anfield, and the supporters would listen to them. And they really took to You'll Never Walk Alone. And then it dropped out of the charts, and so they stopped playing it. And the supporters began saying, well, where's our song? And so they just began singing it themselves. So I had this yearning to, I guess, take the inspiration from what Ange had said in that press conference to say something about our club, which was both in the present, that is, to really sort of capture what he was going through with the team at that time, which was that there was a lack of belief and the project was being questioned, but also to aspire to make something that was more timeless about both the history of our club and the destiny of our club. And, you know, you do have this, you know, if you follow elite sports people, elite athletes, yes, they work incredibly hard on the training track when they're at practice to perfect their talent so that when they're playing a game, the great things they do are kind of second nature. So that's all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes. But beyond, there is a certain something that they have, which is belief is what it is. And it's an unshakable belief that no matter what they're going to come up against, no matter what trials or tribulations they're going to face, they're ultimately going to prevail and achieve their goal. Now, for someone who's followed Postecoglou in his 26 years of coaching before he came to Spurs, 26 years of coaching before he came to Spurs, that's just been the hallmark of all of the teams that he's coached. And so whether or not he had a kind of, you know, European competition pedigree was of less interest to me because we've had that. You know, we've had Mourinho, we've had Conte, extraordinary, you know, among the best managers of their era and probably of all time at the club, and they hadn't won a trophy. So for me, this project with Postecoglou that I tried to capture in this song was about something deeper than football. It was actually about really posing the question to ourselves as a club and as supporters who love the club, posing the question about whether we do actually believe that it is our destiny to not just challenge for 5th or challenge for 4th, or not just occasionally win a cup and be happy with that. Were we prepared to change our view of ourselves and actually see ourselves as a serial league title winning club? Of course, we've only won 2 league titles in 142 years. Mm-hmm. I think I went through and did an analysis, and changed to Postecoglou when he was appointed. If you take all of the sort of mid-season managerial changes, I think we'd had 31 managerial changes in 39 years. I think there's a direct correlation between 31 managerial changes in 39 years and 2 league titles in 142 years. So I guess I then explored those themes, and you know, I've always been inspired by, I guess, you know, gospel music, but also in the great Anglican tradition, you know, the sort of the choral singing and so forth, even in the British culture, of that notion of coming together and singing a song together that's about striving, where you've got a congregation of many people with disparate views and personalities and backgrounds coming together as one to sing in a singular voice. It was all about that. So I guess, the chorus, I guess, captures a bit of what Ange talked about, which was, we will stand on the highest ground, we'll sing our Spurs to glory. For the dream we share, we will achieve as long as we believe. And then in the verses, I just tried to tap into maybe some of those traditional, maybe gospel themes, from the darkest valley, we will rise as one, spurred along by bird, by song, until we reach the sun, the image of the bird for me was really important to have the cockerel in there in that way, in that first verse. Because the truth is that image of the cockerel, just seeing that image is an emotional thing for all Spurs supporters. It stands alone as a symbol of a club in the world. There's no other club in the world that has a symbol like it that represents the club. So it was important to touch upon that in the first verse. And then the second verse says, we will shine together in our darkest hours, side by side, a million wide, till victory is ours, And I guess that for me really felt important, because it has been, we have had dark times in these 2 seasons. If you look statistically at what Postecoglou's done, he's inherited a team that finished 8th that had Harry Kane in it. In his first season, he's taken it to 5th and taken us back into Europe without Harry Kane in that team. And we'll touch upon that 11th game against Chelsea and how it transformed what was looking like potentially a league title challenging season. And then in his second season, of course, we'll get into that as well, with the injuries and the league position and the number of losses. But in his second season, he's not only won us our first European trophy in 41 years, but he's got us back into the Champions League by doing so. And I have seen him this season, during the depths of that injury crisis, under more pressure than I've ever seen him in his whole career. Having barely 11 fit players through December, January, February, having to play teenagers out of position just to cobble together a team while playing in 4 competitions at once, 2 games a week, travelling Europe, and copping loss after loss after loss after loss in the Premier League, in the middle of the bitter cold winter. I mean, we don't have winters like yours in Australia. So it's a whole different kind of context in the UK. You also have really short days in those winter months. We're sort of blessed with sunshine in Australia for most of the year. So, even the winter months is pretty mild. So I think just watching him in those press conferences, I really felt for the guy. And yet throughout that time, he went through all of those press conferences, standing up for his club, standing up for his players, never once sort of admonishing the team as a team in the press conferences, accepting responsibility for the losses, which frankly they are his responsibility. So I guess I began to sing the song to a few people who really liked it and started singing it along with me, family members. And I came to London, which is when you and I met, and sang it to a couple of people there. Managed to borrow a little guitar at one stage and do that. And so I was really encouraged to, give the song a life. So I went back to Adelaide and approached Andy Seymour, who's a great friend of mine, who's a fantastic, really well-known and well-regarded singer in Adelaide and in Australia, who's just got a beautiful voice, and a great mate of mine, Darren Mullen, who's a great record producer, an engineer, and another great musician, Sean Holton, who's a multi-instrumentalist and singer, and Darren also is an instrumentalist and singer. and I asked them if they'd be willing to have a go at recording this song, just the three of them. And the product is the song that you played with that video at the start. And I just thought they did a beautiful job. I'm very humbled by being able to have such talented people record a song that I've written. And especially that lead vocal by Andy Seymour is just soaring. I said to him, Andy, you've turned this into a combination of Amazing Grace and The Wonder of You, and he was pretty chuffed with that. So anyway, so it's been nice sort of getting it out there, and I'm very grateful to you, Chris, for doing the world premiere of the music video on your channel. And yeah, I hope it's given some Spurs fans a sense of hope and joy to watch those images of our team as it's battled through this season, through the toughest of times, and yet come out on top in Europa League and with a rousing tune.
Well, I tell you, Adrian, goosebumps every single time I play that song. Now, it is out now, isn't it, on Spotify and on Apple Music?
Well, actually, it's coming out on Spotify and Apple Music in the next few days. So yeah, it'll be, I'm just holding back the release to the audio, but yes, at the moment on YouTube, on Tottenham Believers, which is the YouTube channel, and no doubt on Chris Cowlin's channel every once in a while as we keep rolling through this period. And it's, it'll be out on Spotify and Apple Music and so forth under the artist name is Tottenham Believers, and it'll be featuring Andy Seymour.
Well, best of luck with the song, Adrian. And as you said, we'll certainly play it on this channel a number of times throughout the summer, certainly. And it's funny, actually, you mentioned there we actually did meet for the first time earlier this season, and you looked me in the eye and you said, Ange is going to deliver us a trophy. We will be successful under Ange Postecoglou. And you're absolutely right. In throughout the whole of this season, we've gone through some very, very tough times. I know a lot of the media narrative, even though we've won the Europa League, which we'll talk about in a minute, everyone goes on about those 22 league defeats. And yes, we can all sit here and say we've had all of those injuries, but a lot of people have had a lot of doubts. But you being Australian, you have seen Ange Postecoglou's career a lot closer than a lot of us in England have. He's always had doubters, hasn't he? Always. And he had a very, very difficult moment after he'd coached South Melbourne to the ultimate success in Australia as championship winner. He then took a detour and decided to take on the job of coaching the Australian under-20 team. It was a very, very different gig because it's as much about player development as it is about, winning. It's about both those things. And there's obviously that infamous television interview that he did when they bombed out again, and Craig Foster gave him quite a hard time. And he just quietly regrouped. I went to Greece and coached for a little while. Started just holding little coaching sessions with kids while he did some work in the media. And really, I think the turning point for Ange was he was then approached to coach Brisbane Roar in the national competition. And I think he decided at that point, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to succeed or fail on my own terms. And so he, with that team, transformed Australian football. He played the most exhilarating brand of football, much, what we kind of know as Ange Ball, I suppose, colloquially. And he really, they had a record unbeaten run. They won the championship. And he just thrilled, it was a brand of football that didn't just thrill Brisbane supporters, it thrilled all the supporters of the game in Australia. And it was relatively high risk, I suppose, and it took a while to take hold. But having said that, we actually have like a playoff system, a finals and a grand final system. So in Australia, unlike traditionally in football, the team that finishes at the top of the ladder at the end of the season isn't the champion. We then have the top 5 or top 6 teams that play off in playoffs, and then it's a grand final between the 2 teams that make the grand final.
And so it's always this kind of final game that's a cup final, effectively, that determines who the champion is. And, he proved that he kind of had a method of approaching the full season. But when it came to actually a game that had to be won to either win or lose a trophy, there was just this extraordinary sort of winning mentality that you saw, that somehow he always seemed to find a way to win. And they weren't always sort of these sort of tiki-taka type Ange ball performances. They were gritty, resilient performances, and that applied to Brisbane Roar as well. So I guess I'd already seen the full spectrum of Ange in different contexts. And and I think when we look at this season, well, last season and this season, I think there's too little kind of in-depth statistical analysis and context that's looked at to understand what's happened in the league. I know now in recent sort of days and weeks, people have started to pay a bit more sort of acknowledgement to it. But I just think it's too easy to say, 22 losses in the league equals manager must be sacked. I mean, it's just too simplistic. I think I've said on your channel before, Chris, that we all know the famous story that after taking Manchester United and was managing Manchester United, after taking them to 11th position twice in his first 3 seasons, in his 4th season, they had 16 losses. He took them to 13th place on the ladder. They were in a relegation battle for part of that season. They lost 5-1 to Manchester City, 4-0 to Nottingham Forest. They lost 2-1 to Crystal Palace, and there was a sign that, fans holding up signs saying that he had to be sacked. 3 years of excuses and it's still crap, was the sign. And there was a lot of pressure on Ferguson, and fans and media were calling for his sacking. But they managed to win a cup that season, and the board stuck with him. Hey, and it wasn't a fairy tale the next season. In his 5th season, they finished 6th. In his 6th season, they finished 2nd. And then it was only in his 7th season that they brought in Eric Cantona, who just won the title at Leeds. Yeah. And that was the missing piece. So, of course, when I've made this point in the past, people laugh and say, well, look at this bozo from Australia. He's comparing Ange Postecoglou to the great Sir Alex Ferguson. Well, he wasn't the great Sir Alex Ferguson in their 4th season, losing 16 matches, finishing 13th, getting thrashed 5-1 by Manchester City, I can tell you, at least in the minds of most people. He became Sir Alex Ferguson because the Manchester United board had patience with him and saw that he was doing good work. He was slowly transforming the club, bringing in players, but also working a system in the academy system to help build a really resilient club. And I see all the ingredients of that here. And then I guess we have to ask ourselves as a club, what do we want to be? I think Tottenham stands alone among all the football clubs of the world. There's a romance. There's a certain something about Tottenham that's almost more art than sport. The romance and the fairy tales of Tottenham, particularly as a cup-winning side, and then years of suffering, and then cup-winning side and winning cups, till after that 91 FA Cup, where, we've then struggled a bit to win cups, and we've been knocked out of semi-finals, and we've gained a reputation for not being able to win the big games. But, in that first 100 years of the club's history, we were known as a club that you could rely on. When we came to a cup final, we would win it. So I think, to me, it's been a much more interesting experience to watch Tottenham under Postecoglou, because I always felt we needed to go into the depths of struggle before we would come out the other side. And this season has absolutely delivered it. And it's I'm in Italy at the moment, actually, Chris. I'm not in Australia, so I'm actually on a decent time zone for a change with you. But, I've got to say that I acknowledge that whilst we have to get up at 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. to watch games, which is in itself a sacrifice, for people like you who go and have gone to all the home and away games and other games and watching the juniors play and travelling with the side when it plays outside of the country as well. When you're doing that and seeing all 38 Premier League games, and we have a season in the Premier League like we did this year, particularly in the middle of the winter where, the weather ain't good, it's bitterly cold, it's dark, it's gloomy, you're looking just for that little blue glimmer of sunshine and joy. To have copped what you copped this season in the Premier League, including and especially at home games, I fully acknowledge that it must have been very, very difficult to withstand it. And I see how a lot of people lost belief.
I was going to say, Adrian, sorry to interrupt you there. You were on the exact podcast where I started to lose a little bit of faith and a little bit of patience and a little bit of belief, actually. Yeah. And it was that Fulham game. Because Ange made so many changes. We were going into an international break. Of course, that was another game where he had an argument after the game with another fan. And of course, we saw the cupping of the ear as well, Chelsea away. A lot of people were losing a lot of patience. And I believe that the away end, the fans that go to the away games, they are normally the positive ones because they are there every single game without foul. And those are the ones that really are patient with the manager. So when I saw their reaction, that Chelsea away game, the Fulham away game, that's when a lot of people started to lose a lot of patience. But you probably know on Sunday, Craig and I recorded a fan show 4 hours long, and we ran a poll, and it was 74% of fans want Ange Postecoglou to keep his job. The rest want Ange gone. What do you make? And I know this is going to probably be quite a long-winded question and lots of questions within one, but how's the last 2 weeks been for you as a Spurs fan? Because you've always been a believer of Ange Postecoglou. What do you make of the fans that do want Ange gone, even though he has delivered success? And when I say that, he's only one of 3 managers to do so in our history of winning a European trophy. And to rub shoulders with the great Bill Nicholson and Keith Birkinshaw, that takes some doing. And as you mentioned earlier, Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte, Mauricio Pochettino, we've had some great managers at this football club in very recent times, and they have failed to get us over that line. And also what I wanted to ask as well is how different do you find the Australian media to the English media in terms of there seems to be a lot of disrespect towards Ange Postecoglou, a lot of the press, certainly in this country, probably actually, that's probably the wrong word. Probably they wanted him to foul. Ange come out and said a number of times, "I always win in my second season." And as we were going out of those cup competitions, FA Cup, League Cup, etc., they kept crossing them off and saying, "Well, he's only got one more chance left." Yeah. And it was like they could not wait for him to, be knocked out of the Europa League. But I suppose the ultimate question, what I want to ask you is, what do you make of so many fans wanting Ange Postecoglou gone, despite him delivering this success? And, I've said to you before, I've had the time of my life in the last 2 weeks. I want to feel like this every year.
Yeah. I think I could break that category of fans into 2 categories. There are those who wanted him gone before the end of the first season. They'd made up their mind that they felt he was tactically not up to the, level, and that there was some sense that he just wouldn't be able to withstand the sort of tactical ability of other managers. And so they've been sort of very negative about him for a long time. And I think they sort of felt like the first 10, and I suspect some of them may have been very sceptical about his appointment. And so they took the first 10 games where we were so brilliant in that first season with a pinch of salt and felt it was just a honeymoon. And we would really see when it got tough what he was like. And they just dug in even deeper as the sort of Ange out brigade in this season. Then there was, just sort of following a bit of this stuff on social media, then there was a whole group of supporters who kind of suspended their judgment for quite a while, or were actually wanting to stick with him. But as it got darker and darker and worse during that injury crisis, and our league form was so poor, and then, of course, when we started to get players back from injury, but he was then sacrificing the league selections in favour of trying to maximise our performance in the Europa League. They then, you started hearing people saying, well, I was Ange in, but I'm definitely now Ange out, 20 losses or 21 losses or 17 losses. This is unacceptable for a club like Spurs. I mean, you could have trademarked that line. And yet, it's really interesting to see that there's quite a lot of those people who have openly admitted, whether it's on their social media accounts or in other forums, that they've now changed their position because of what he's achieved in the Europa League. They didn't believe he was going to be able to do it. They thought it was just a matter of time that we'd get knocked out. And then, despite having beaten Manchester United every time we've played them this season and not having been beaten by them under Postecoglou, I think they just assumed we just wouldn't come up to muster in the final for whatever reasons, historical, cultural, whatever it might be. And so they have come back and said, look, I know I was Ange out, but the guys now just delivered us our first trophy in 17 years and our first European one in 41 years, and we're back in the Champions League. We've got to give this guy his third season. However, there is a now increasingly small group of fans that have stuck to their position, I think. I don't think they're as vocal as they necessarily were in the middle of the depths of despair during the Premier League. A lot of them, including some of them who were kind of messaging me and sort of almost ridiculing my support of Ange's tenure during the darkest months, they've kind of gone quiet. What do I make of it? I mean, I just think they love the club, each to their own opinion. I can't criticise people for feeling the way they do or having the opinion they do. And there's certainly aspects of our football during those Premier League matches and some of those losses where, we just, particularly when we didn't have the ball, we just weren't compact. We were just, we were leaking balls through the midfield, very open, and seemed to be very easy to score against. And obviously we're having we didn't, until sort of more recently in the league, we still didn't seem to have too many problems scoring. I mean, it was still one of the highest, until relatively late in the season, we were still one of the highest scoring teams in the league. What do I make of those supporters? It's your club, it's our club. No one can deny you the right to feel the way you do or make your assessment of the manager that you're making. I do object to people being abusive towards other fans. I just think it's unacceptable. Sometimes to suggest that's all great. I'm happy to have a joke about it as well. But my sense is that there's been. So I've seen a few things of some pretty abusive stuff towards really loyal Tottenham supporters from fans, including saying, one of the labels that's been thrown around is, well, you're an Ange supporter, not a Spurs supporter, which I think is a real insult because that's been said to not just Australian supporters, that's been said to, to British, to Londoners who follow Spurs and who've backed Ange. So that's been pretty hurtful, I've got to say. And I think they're wrong in their assessment. I'll tell you why I think they're wrong. I'll tell you what, if you're happy to, because I think it segues into why I think Ange needs to stay. Apart from the obvious that he's delivered what he's delivered this season in terms of this trophy win. And I'm really pleased you mentioned Bill Nicholson and Keith Birkinshaw. He now stands with those two giants of the club's history. He stands alone in the modern era. Now, and Chris, you'd well know this, but before Nicholson took us to the double in the early 60s there, the title in the FA Cup and then European success, he did actually coach us to, I think it was an 18th place finish. So he had a terrible season in the league before he had all that success, and the club stuck with him. And the same thing applied to Birkinshaw. Keith Birkinshaw got us relegated. Before he had that success in 81, 82, 84, the FA Cups and the UEFA Cup, Keith Birkinshaw got us relegated into second division. The club stuck with him. He then got us back into the first division in one season. So if that is not a template, if that is not a clear sign to supporters that the great victories and successes of our club have actually come from going through the depths of despair and the darkest of times and coming out of that and remaining united and using those difficult experiences to galvanise a team and a coach together, I don't know what will. With Postecoglou, we have a situation where we've both finished 17th and won a trophy in the same season. So we haven't had to have that delay between that terrible second season in the league and then having to wait 1 or 2 or 3 years to then win a trophy. So in many respects, so when he says I've achieved something unprecedented, he's right. He's right. So I think that history is really important. If we are something more than just 11 players on a field and a manager and a business and a stadium and merchandise, if we're something that's cultural as a club, if we're something that's got soul, which I believe we absolutely are, and as I said, I think we stand alone. We're unique in the world as a football club. There's no other club like us. Now, in some cases, for the wrong reasons, right? The Spursy tag, Dr. Tottenham, all those things. In one fell swoop this season, he has just wiped the floor with those tags. There's not only, if you're just looking at that from a business point of view, forget about it being a club and a community that's Tottenham, that is the heart and soul of that club. If you were just standing back purely from a business point of view, that story is priceless to sell to the world.
Yeah.
It is a redemption story. Redemption stories are the greatest stories of all. If it was easy, it wouldn't be anywhere near as meaningful. Now, and just on that, Chris, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off your question, but my brother Paul, who you might recall sang the song with me early on with the ukulele a few weeks ago, I said to him at one stage a few weeks ago, I said, he's the one who put me onto Tottenham. He started following Tottenham in 1978 because we'd signed Ozzy Ardiles and Ricky Villa, and he'd fallen in love with the Argentinian team of the 1978 World Cup. So that's how I became a Tottenham supporter. My big brother dragged me along on the basis of a couple of Argentinians being signed to the club. And I was very lucky as an 11 and 12-year-old. We won back-to-back FA Cups, and that was just a great way to start following the football club. But I said to Paul, look, it'd be good to know what our record has been in Ange's first 2 seasons. When we've had Romero, Van der Ven, Porro and Udogie playing together.
Yeah.
Can you please go and have a look, game by game, at our record when those 4 defenders have played in the Premier League? And this was the analysis he came up with, and I did some checking, and it looks. Now, I'd love if any of your listeners or followers have done this analysis and we've got this statistically wrong, I'd love them to comment and correct it. But Paul's done a really great job on this. So in Ange's first season, Romero, Van der Ven, Porro and Udogie played together in 18 of the 38 Premier League matches.
Yep.
Our win, draw, loss record in those 18 matches was 67% win, 22% draw, 11% loss. Now, if you just, as a theoretical exercise, apply that win, draw, loss record to the remaining 20 games where they didn't play, i.e., theoretically assume they played all 38 games and they would have achieved the same level of results, we would have finished with 83 points in third place above Liverpool, 15 points ahead of Aston Villa, who would have dropped down to fifth. Then if you look at the second season, Romero, Van de Ven, Udogie and Porro have played together in only 13 of the Premier League games. Our win, draw, loss record in those 13 games, according to Paul's research, 62% win, 8% draw, 31% loss. Now, if you do the same theoretical exercise and you assume that for the remaining 25 matches where we play together, that they had played together, so that we had the benefit of those four defenders across the 38 games, and we'd achieved the same results in the 25 games that they didn't play together as we had in the 13 games they did play together, we would have finished on 74 points in the league, which is the same number of points that Arsenal had. And given the way we were with our goal difference, we would have finished second above Arsenal on goal difference.
Yeah.
So that tells me that when, and of course, we'll get to Vicario in a minute, but when Ange Postecoglou has had his four best defenders playing together in the Premier League, we are a team that challenges for the title. We are a team that is challenging for the first or second or third position. Now, we all know that he has a particular system when he's playing, his side's playing in its optimal format, let's call it. We all know that Van de Ven is critical to that system. He's absolutely critical, as is Romero. The combination of that, and we've heard Ange talk about this, it's not just about saying, oh, this player and that player, it's also the way those players complement each other. And I think we saw the ultimate example of that in the Europa League final. I mean, the performance that Romero and Van de Ven put on together in that Europa League final, if you could mint that, and mass produce it, wow. And then you add to that the two fullbacks.
Adrian, what I was going to say is it's a very sensible outlook, and I too have looked at all of those stats as well. And we all know when Ange Postecoglou has a fully fit squad, and I don't think, by the way, he's ever had a fully fit squad. I know some rival Premier League fans will say, yeah, but every single team has injuries, and some people will say, yeah, but when you do have some of these injuries, you have to find a way to win, another way. And there's always going to be that narrative of, 22 league defeats is not good enough. And I don't think me or you are sitting here, although we are pro Ange, saying that 22 league defeats is good enough, because it isn't. And we wouldn't agree with that at all. Ange has had a lot of problems within the club. He's even had that mole that he spoke about in the press conference, which, doesn't help the football club. He's had a lot of problems, and he's had a lot of crap, so to speak, to deal with when he came in at the football club. And you rightly said, he came in when we were 8th. Harry Kane left. We had no European football. And if you'd have said to anybody when he arrived, even people who were sceptical about his appointment, and there were a lot in this country, I might add, if you'd have said first season we'll be unbeaten in the first 10 games, we'll finish 5th in the Premier League, we'll come close to finishing the Champions League, but sadly we won't quite get over the line, but we will get in the Europa League. And then that following season, we will win the Europa League. If you'd have said that to someone 2 years down the line, we will win the Europa League, and then you'd say to those exact people, well, we're then going to be, talking about sacking the manager. A lot of people would have gone, you're absolutely crazy. But I think it's really important to keep saying, what situation Postecoglou walked into at the football club. I feel like a lot of people think that he just walked into an easy job. It wasn't an easy job, and he's won this trophy. However, I'll go back to the 22 league defeats, which a lot of people keep talking about. I do understand people being worried about 22 league defeats. And as you said, I went to all these games and it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun watching us lose 22 games in the Premier League. I can tell you that. But what's happening now, Ange Postecoglou has gone away on holiday. There is a lot of speculation, a lot of made up stuff in the media at the moment about Postecoglou has been sacked. A lot of them have actually come out with those words. Ange Postecoglou has been sacked. Well, that's not true. To my knowledge, at the moment, the club haven't made a decision. Are you surprised with the club not coming out with anything? Do they need to come out with anything? Because he's got a 4-year contract at the end of the day. He's gone away on holiday. Do you think that Ange Postecoglou will be the Spurs manager? Will he get the 3rd season that he wants? And I love that mic drop moment, by the way, at the parade. And that parade, like, I've got goosebumps talking about the parade again. Being in that parade of thousands of Spurs fans there, and Ange saying, season 3 is always better than season 2. We all know, we can all sit here and say that Ange Postecoglou wants to manage Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. And I'm just going to read you this quote as well, because although you in your job, you're very good with words, Ange Postecoglou is also extremely good with words, as you know. He said, I didn't want us just to enjoy the moment. I also wanted us to think about what is next. Don't settle for this. We've got a taste of it now. My players have got a taste for it. The club's got a taste for it. Well, let's make sure we are back here again. And like I said to you, I want this feeling. I want to feel like this all the time. But surely, Adrian, we're both very sensible people, when it comes to, talking about Spurs and the future of Tottenham. Surely, if you were the chairman, Daniel Levy and the board, surely they've got to sit down with Ange and say, 22 league defeats is not good enough. Thank you for delivering success in the Europa League. Thanks for getting us in the Champions League. Thanks for, deleting that term Spursy, which I absolutely hate, by the way, and Dr. Tottenham, as you rightly mentioned. But surely a discussion needs to be, taking place. And, if you or I were Daniel Levy, we would probably say to Ange, look, these 22 league defeats, what's going to happen here? How do we, turn these 22 league defeats into a lot less? And how do we climb up that Premier League table? And surely Ange is going to come back and say, like you've just said, when I've got all of my players fully fit, our win percentage is a lot better. So I need a better squad. I need more players in. I need to back in these transfer windows. And plus we're playing Champions League. So Champions League, you need a much, much better squad, don't you?
Yeah, I think that's right. Whoever's managing the side, you forget about the fact that you're playing Champions League against the very best teams in Europe. And therefore, you've got to have quality and a depth of squad to be able to compete against those sides, because those sides, many of them, the very good ones, have an incredibly deep squad. Which means they can manage the Champions League against their league, their own sort of national league matches. I've always felt that where there's a vacuum of information, rumour and innuendo prosper. And in this case, in a strict sense, Ange Postecoglou is contracted to next season. He doesn't have to. There's no formal reason why the club needs to announce that he's staying on. He is contracted. He's required. He's expected to be there in a sort of contractual sense. But there's been I suppose, since the celebrations have kind of died down and he's gone on holiday, I guess there's been, particularly in the last sort of 48 to 72 hours, just this kind of vacuum where a lot of speculation has been swirling around. Now, I'm always so slow to judge people and how they go about things and their motives or what might be happening, because I'm not aware of all the things that are going on behind the scenes. And there may be very good reason. There may be conversations that are being had behind the scenes that are entirely proper and appropriate that need to happen. I note that we've just had a board member who's stepped down after decades, and Ryan Mason's taken the job at West Bromwich Albion, and there's change that's going on at the football club. There's a new CEO who's just been brought in. It sounds like Fabio Paratici's been around the place in some sort of capacity informally. Who's kind of been out of football for disciplinary reasons. And of course, no doubt this is a business where potentially there might be opportunities there to be selling a share of the club. So there's all these things that are always in play, whatever the rumours might be. In truth, those things are all possible. Mm. There may be multiple things going on in that sphere, which are kind of interconnected. And I suppose, for me, I think it was important to keep the momentum. This is just my judgment. I'm not the chairman or the new CEO, so I don't know what information they have or what's going on behind the scenes. But I guess the historic moment we've just enjoyed and the springboard it gives us as a club to move into the next phase of a rebuild. It's a rebuild, let's face it. We're 2 years into what is probably a multi-year rebuild, if done properly. I just think this little vacuum has the potential to just kind of, if he keeps his job, it's just a bit of a, to me, a bit of a bitter a taste that's starting to enter the mouth. And, I think there's momentum to be had in circumstances where the players who went to hell and back this year through the injury crisis and really were defended and protected by Postecoglou and carried through that whole thing by Postecoglou as a kind of father figure. Kind of like a modern day Bill Nicholson figure.
Yeah.
It seems that the unity in that dressing room is quite extraordinary, and there's a great platform for next season. So, to me, it feels obvious that a statement needs to be made promptly that Postecoglou is continuing, notwithstanding rumours that he might be losing his job. I have to say I find it weird seeing all these rumours swirl around. Social media is almost, you just see these things coming out. They're sort of, they don't seem to be verified. They don't. Yeah. So maybe they're true, maybe they're not true.
There's a lot of copy and pasting, Adrian. So I said this on the channel in the last couple of days. You've got to be very careful because someone just seems to make a story up, or it goes in a WhatsApp group and says, my mate down the pub said blah, 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 and he works at the club, and, that's how all these rumours start. And it just amazes me, the journalism now, and even Ange has pointed this out, journalism, you double-check facts, you treble-check facts, and it just doesn't seem to happen now. A story just goes out there, and some of these stories have been by journalists as well, which is really sad to see. They've actually put out statements. Ange Postecoglou has been sacked. Well, he hasn't. And it just went... everyone copy and pasted it, and you just think, come on, guys, what are you doing? Why are you copy and pasting this information, which is clearly false? It's purely done for clicks, which I was very disappointed by that, I must say, over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of journalist reports, which I guess on the one hand surprised me, because other than that, I've just seen sort of social media accounts just sort of throwing stuff around, which, what does it mean? It seems meaningless to me. There were some stories about Thomas Frank having met with the club and already telling them who he wanted in the transfer market and so forth, which I just thought was completely absurd. But I mean, when you do have journalists who are writing for, I guess, mainstream publications who are sort of delving into this stuff, one assumes that they're double checking or triple checking sources and so forth. But I've served on boards for years in various organisations, and I just don't know that this sort of stuff is necessarily being talked about by people within the club who actually know to people outside the club. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm naive. The British media does have, great reputation for building and destroying careers. So, but I guess I've become a little bit fatalistic about it. I've tried to sort of to shut it off. I've been talking mainly with kind of friends who are fellow Spurs supporters. I have to say, there is an absolute disbelief. And I'm not talking about Australian Spurs supporters. I'm talking about Spurs supporters who are in North London, who have followed the club since they were children, who are incredibly astute observers of the game, who know the culture of the club, that understand who Spurs really are and who we can be. and the greatness, the magic that is Tottenham Hotspur. And they are in absolute disbelief at the notion that Ange Postecoglou would not be managing the team next year. And we all acknowledge the 22 defeats.
Yeah.
But we feel like it's a really sort of pivotal moment for the club. I think that the consequences of him being sacked after delivering what he's just delivered have the potential to be catastrophic.
Adrian, whilst I would love to see Ange Postecoglou, and I feel like he deserves to be given that chance to have the third season, I can't call, me personally, I cannot call what Daniel Levy and the board are going to do. I wouldn't be surprised if they said to Ange, thank you very much, goodbye. I wouldn't be at all surprised, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the dugout for the start of next season. Nothing would surprise me anymore, because I feel like some of the decisions we've seen in recent years, like Pochettino, you go back 2019, he took us to a Champions League final, and I know I say this a lot on the channel, but I feel like this is very relevant. You know, didn't spend a penny in 518 days in multiple transfer windows. You know, rather than, you know, giving him the tools and giving him the players that he really needed. And plus we spent that time away at Wembley, which was extremely difficult for the club, Pochettino, the players, etc. You know, rather than, you know, give him the players that he needed for that squad to have a true rebuild, they got rid of him in the November. They brought Jose Mourinho in. And then, of course, Jose Mourinho, we sacked him 6 days before a cup final against Pep, who, you know, his record in cup finals is exceptional, especially against Pep Guardiola as well, which was a very strange decision. And then Conte, of course, had that rant after that 3-3 draw at St Mary's against Southampton, spoke a lot of truth in that. The board didn't like it. Of course, they got rid of him. We've seen a lot of decision making, you know, at board level to do with managers, and some people will be surprised, some people won't be surprised. And as I said, I won't be surprised whatever happens. What's your hunch? Because I honestly cannot call this. I'm 50-50 whether Ange Postecoglou will stay or not, because everything that we are seeing in the media, and I know a lot of it has been circulating that is false, but some of the stuff from top journalists saying that Spurs have been talking to other managers, including Thomas Frank. I believe that there could be some truth in that, you know, from the reports and the journalists putting that out. But Andrew's just delivered us a European trophy. I feel, you know, as a fan, I know it's been an emotional couple of weeks, and I'm not speaking out of emotion. I'm speaking, you know, trying to be level-headed about things and weighing it all up. And like you know, talking about those facts and stats about, you know, when he's got his team available, we've seen we can be a very, very good side. If I was to ask you, do you think Postecoglou will be, not what you want, do you think he will be? What decision do you think Daniel Levy will come to?
It's such a difficult question, because I have, over the last 48 hours, been pretty shocked by the rumours that have been floating around. I really wasn't expecting it. I having kept him all season, and then having seen him win the Europa League, I just, despite the dissatisfaction with the league, the 22 losses, the place finish, I just thought it was so obvious that the club would come out and confirm he would be continuing and doing that promptly. So it has unsettled me, Chris, I have to say, as a supporter, and as someone who is also just a dispassionate, you know, observer of the game. You know, who has a look at what other clubs are doing, admires other managers, admires other clubs for the way they go about things, and also sees the failings of other clubs and other managers. So it's a really difficult question to answer. I'm going to predict that he stays. I don't do that with any great confidence. I hope. I'm trying to sort of go back through those managerial changes that you've just talked about and ask myself, well, is there context for each one?
Well, there was another point as well that I should have made, that when Spurs offloaded Jose Mourinho, we waited 72 days for a manager. A lot of people felt like there was going to be a plan in place, and of course Ryan Mason came in as an interim, but we waited 72 days for a manager, and you would think that there would be much better planning if Spurs are going to replace a manager. And like I said to you on that fan show that we did on Sunday, the fan poll, 74%. Now, I've seen, even on social media, which can be very negative at times, particularly about Spurs and Ange Postecoglou, as you well know, but the majority of fans seem to be wanting Ange Postecoglou to stay, given that he has won this European trophy for us. So I suppose the question is, are the club going to go against the majority of what the fans want, in terms of, wanting Ange Postecoglou to stay? Because, delivering us a trophy, and as you've mentioned, and as I keep mentioning, 41 years without a European trophy, 17 long years without any trophy, and getting rid of that Spursy tag, shutting up a lot of the media, etc. And, the way Ange does deal with the media, I think is really, really good. And I tell you, I've said on this channel many times before, if I was to be asked some of the questions that Ange does get asked week by week, and some of the same questions again and again, I would probably lose my patience and probably get a little bit ruder and just say, look, I answered that one last week, refer back to it, because it is the same old stuff constantly, isn't it? And I feel like sometimes they are trying to wind him up a little bit, but I feel like that he's dealt with that extremely well, don't you?
I do. As I said, he was under intense pressure. We weren't in the dressing room, but they were. As he said, every time he thought there might be light at the end of the tunnel, he realised it was an oncoming train. So for him to have held it together during that time, and there were some pretty testy moments in those exchanges with journalists in press conferences, which, he sailed close to the line sometimes. But I think he deserves enormous respect and acknowledgement for what he's withstood. And coming back to the question of his position, rather than trying to predict what the board will do, I guess I'd rather sort of what I feel the board should do.
Yeah.
And I want to sort of just kind of separate this out from Ange in particular. I think it's absolutely appropriate and proper for the board, after a season in which the team has finished 17th, but is also going to be playing Champions League, which is kind of crazy when you actually say that out loud. Typically you've got to finish in the top 4 to make Champions League. We're now going to be playing Champions League coming off a 17th place finish. So if you just look at those numbers, the board and the new CEO need to be asking themselves not just about what has he achieved, but what are our prospects for next season. Obviously, when you finish 17th on paper, you should be worrying that you might be in relegation territory next year. I guess you might say that historically, a team that finished 17th might well drop lower next season. You also are going to be playing in Champions League, and you want to be giving a good account of yourselves in the Champions League. So you've got to ask yourself, having seen what we've seen, not just this season, but over the 2 seasons, is this manager the right person to take us forward? Because if your conclusion is that he's not, and that's not enough. You've also got to have an alternative that you believe does have the ability to take you forward and succeed. But that first question, is he the person to take us forward? For the reasons we've discussed, which is not just about feeling or emotion or how great the parade was or how great that feeling was in that pretty, let's face it, that it was a pretty Europa League final between 2 teams that finished 16th and 17th. The standard of the match was pretty pretty poor. But in the end, we got over the line. And finals are kind of that nature in many respects. We've seen many finals over the years where teams that have even played very well during the season struggle to really get any fluidity in a final. So I think for all the reasons you and I have discussed, Chris, if you just take a step back from all of it and you just look at the Postecoglou 2 seasons analytically, the conclusion must be he is the man. And you add to that, I suppose, some recognition for what he's achieved, which is historic, plus the unity that he's achieved within that dressing room. It seems to me that, it's an obvious choice to keep him for the 3rd season and give him every opportunity and support to thrive with this as a platform. The other thing that we've got to always remember is that the grass might look greener on the other side of the fence. There are no guarantees. Yeah. And if any club knows this, it's Tottenham. We replaced Pochettino with Mourinho on the basis that we had kind of, with Pochettino as a relatively young manager with a young team, we had kind of overachieved in many respects. Probably no one realised that Harry Kane was going to be the player that he was at the beginning of Pochettino's tenure, that by the end of the tenure he would be at that level and we'd have that kind of combination. But I suppose you then go, if you put yourself in the chairman's position at the time, even though we made the Champions League final in 2019, the second half of that season was awful. And then the first part of the Premier League season after we played in the Champions League final was awful. We were in 14th place on the ladder when Pochettino was sacked. And we didn't look like we looked like we were at risk of continuing to drop. Now, of course, the point about the fact that he wasn't backed in the transfer market and all of that is a point's well made. But, at the time, Mourinho was still, I guess one of the small handful of absolute, what you would call guaranteed winning managers. And it was almost like the sense was, well, we're now worthy of a Mourinho because we've sort of got our results consistently in that top 4, challenging for top 4. And it almost felt like, well, Mourinho's coming in, almost doing us a favour, but we were ready for someone of his stature. And that grass was definitely not greener for whatever reason. It's never just about the manager. It's a combination of manager, squad, injuries. It's all these things. Then, of course, Nuno had a very difficult period of sort of poor results and what was regarded as kind of dire sort of style of football that didn't last very long at all. I think 18 games perhaps. And then, of course, we had the Conte blow-up in circumstances where he somehow got us to 4th position in his first season. And we were in 4th position when he left the club after that Southampton draw. Yeah. So, look, here's my take on these things. I think stability trumps everything else in most cases in sporting clubs. Yeah. You may think that there's someone better out there on paper, but there's a huge amount of value in stability. Now, particularly Adrian, when the dressing rooms are not united.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but I feel it's very important to say that because you just said there, is there someone better out there? The names that are putting or being put about at the moment, Thomas Frank. Is Thomas Frank a better manager than Ange Postecoglou? What is going to change if Thomas Frank suddenly comes in at the football club? What's going to change? Why do people think that he's going to get better results than Ange Postecoglou?
Look, I don't see it. I respect all the managers that are being talked about, Frank, Iraola, Silva. Of course, those guys have made what have always been sort of bottom half of the table, mid-table teams into competitive teams. And Glasner at Crystal Palace, those sides have all really, in a historical sense, outperformed their usual sort of performances that you might have expected from them under those managers. So I respect the work that all of those managers have done. doesn't mean they're going to come to Spurs and somehow. Well, I mean, what are we seeking from them? This is a question that's really important to ask. If, in fact, the sole focus of the club at a sort of governance and administrative level is to want to have a team that's vying for fourth or third place each season, because that unlocks Champions League and therefore unlocks a certain amount of revenue. But the idea of winning a league title is more just a kind of almost fantasy or hope. It's not something that you're really necessarily believing you can achieve. Then perhaps those managers might, one of those managers might suit, might or might not. I mean, who knows? As I said, we've had Mourinho and Conte, and we haven't gone any higher than those positions. So Chris, I don't see how they are so obviously, just this compelling choice that we as a club would turn to replace the manager who's just taken us to our first European success in 41 years. It doesn't make sense to me, particularly given the statistical analysis I presented earlier. Yeah. I mean, I think he's on the cusp next year of challenging for the league title.
Well, here's a question, Adrian, right? And I'd like to ask all of the listeners and viewers this as well. So if Postecoglou does get a third year, what's the target? What would be the target for Postecoglou from the board? Does he have to reach a certain league position, i.e. top 4, getting us in Champions League? Is it another trophy that needs to put in the cabinet? Or is it just, be competitive in those cup competitions? Or if Thomas Frank or a Marco Silva or someone else comes in, what would be their targets? Would it be different? Would their targets be different to Ange Postecoglou's if he had a third season? Because I think it would. I think it would be different. Although I think that if Ange did, start that third season, he would have to start it extremely well, Adrian, in my opinion, because I feel like there are a lot of people right now, they would be waiting to get on his back to say, I told you this wasn't going to work. And then if Ange did start the third season and it went dreadfully wrong in the first 3 months, and then he did end up going, there'll be a lot of people, in 6 months' time saying, I told you so. But sure. I feel like if someone came in for a first season, they're always given that time to bed in, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, let me paint this scenario for you. Next season, crystal ball, Ange Postecoglou is the manager of Tottenham and lasts the whole season. And I want to paint this scenario. We get knocked out in the round of 16 in the Champions League. We finish 11th in the Premier League, and we win the FA Cup.
Yeah. Another trophy parade.
Well,
see, I see the positives.
Yeah. Well, I suppose let's look at that scenario, Chris. I mean, the trophy parade was so good this year. I think that the whole challenge of the club would be, how do we better it next year? But, let's look at that scenario. It's not enough to just say, well, if we don't get to fourth and therefore we're out of the Champions League, our business model kind of doesn't justify keeping you. This is where I might differ.
You just hit the nail on the head. The business model. To the fans, the trophies are extremely important, but to the club, top 4 is extremely important for Champions League revenue. So I do feel like there is a difference there. But when you have, witnessed that success of having a trophy and that, I can't go on enough, Adrian, to talk about that parade. And it gives me goosebumps every time I talk about it. That parade was sensational. And I want to feel like that all the time. And, you mentioned about an FA Cup, FA Cup, League Cup, you ask any Newcastle fan, it was certainly the year of the bird. This year, Newcastle haven't won a trophy in many, many years. Crystal Palace, their first ever trophy. It's been a great year for clubs, the underachievers, if you like, of winning trophies. And you ask any Crystal Palace fan, Spurs fan or Newcastle fan right now what it means to win a trophy, it means hell of a lot.
It's huge. I mean, it's absolutely huge. We are more than dollars and cents, and we're more than 11 players on a field and a manager and some support staff. We are a living, breathing organism of millions of people who support this club around the world, and a huge number of those in the UK. It's deeper than that. It's deeper than that. What was achieved with that Europa League win transformed lives. Families will carry that for the rest of their lives, and they will pass that story on to the next generation and the one after that. And some grandson, as a young boy, will be looking at the video of that and saying, my granddad was at that. My granddad told me about the day when he went to the parade when we broke the 41-year drought. Now, I want to extend that analogy a bit further, or that hypothetical scenario a bit further, because I think you've got to have a more holistic view than just saying if you finish fourth, you keep your job. If you finish seventh, you lose your job. Let's say that scenario played out. We finish 11th in the league. We get knocked out in round of. I don't think we will. I think we'll finish much higher. But you finish. You get knocked out of the round of 16 in the Champions League. On a penalty shootout, let's say, and you win the FA Cup. Okay, dang. Let's have a look at that scenario there. Then I want you to ask yourself to go forward 3 years from there, and I want you to assume that we still have some tougher times through that period, but we are building a squad. We are building quality. Archie Gray, Lucas Bergvall, Destiny Udogie, all these players who are very young have now been bedded into being deeply connected with that manager for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and have developed their own skill as players, and have been playing in all sorts of environments and learning. I want to take that forward and say the crystal ball then has us in Postecoglou's 7th and 8th seasons winning the Premier League title back-to-back. Now, I don't see that as being out of the realms of possibility. I know I called my song Believe, and I called our group Tottenham Believers, but Postecoglou is instilling a change in mindset in that group of players, and in a club that has not believed in itself. Has not believed in itself for decades. And you have to take the leap of faith. Now, I remember being on a post-match analysis session with Jar Wobble with you, Chris. Probably it was that Fulham game.
It was.
And Jar quite rightly at the time, because I think I was still quite, positive after that bleak
you were
loss.
Yeah, you were.
I had a feeling, I think you were sitting on a cold set of steps outside the stadium, and I really fell for you. And Jar quite rightly said, well, it's a bit cultish. These people who were still Ange in after this kind of sense that, I think Jar described it as a form of football in which we were asking ourselves, do we need to defend? I accept that cold hard analysis has to happen. And if we hadn't had the results that I read out earlier, when we had Porro, Udogie, Romero, and Van der Ven as our 4 defenders in the team, sure, I'd be with you. I'd be with you. But actually, we have been a very, very formidable outfit when those players have played. And that tells me that, as we saw in the Europa League, and for those who are questioning Ange's Postecoglou's tactical ability, which clearly, quite rightly was questioned during the Premier League, particularly second half after Vicario broke his ankle, November the 24th. I'll never forget that date, because that's it. I mean, we beat Manchester, just on that, Chris, we beat Manchester City away. This is the other thing that needs to be remembered. It was November the 24th, 2024. We beat Manchester City away 4-0 without Romero and without Van der Ven in the team, who were already injured. In the middle of the match, Vicario breaks his ankle, somehow plays the rest of the match and pulls off 2 brilliant saves at least during the course of that match. But as we know, the worst injury crisis of any team in Europe probably happened from that moment on. And then we had this sort of assumption after some players came back from injury, and we kind of lost. Well, as he's quite openly admitted now, he just focused on the Europa League. So I suppose my question to those people who are still doubting this question of whether he ought or whether he ought not continue, I think, what do we lose? The ultimate question is, what do we have to lose by continuing on the path we're on, and what do we have to gain? Mm-hmm. I think we have much more to gain if you just balance those two things up than we have to lose. Of course, you know, Jar might say, oh, well, good luck, we'll get relegated next season if we keep him. Well, I suppose you have the option. I mean, if we really are really in difficult straits in the middle of next season and it's, you know, disaster after disaster, sure, you've still got the option to change course at that point. But now, no, doesn't make sense.
You read out some very interesting stats earlier, Adrian, about the amount of managers that we have had. And Ange has actually come out and said at some point the club actually do need to stick to something. We need stability because, honestly, the amount of managers that we have gone through, you know, can Spurs really keep being like this, of keep replacing managers, you know, every 18 months, 24 months? It's unreal. And it just makes us feel uneasy as fans all the time, because that word rebuild, how many times have we heard that? Year by year by year, a manager comes in, they buy players for their system. Then, you know, 18 months, 2 years down the line, a manager then leaves, and then new manager then needs players for their system, which is different. And then you're going through swapping, changing, you know, fullbacks, defenders, midfielders, strikers, etc. And it just seems like we're going around in circles. For me, and I know both you and I are in the positive camp of keeping Ange and kicking on and moving on, but I don't see what the club would benefit by keep swapping and changing managers around again and again.
Yeah, as I said, the grass is not necessarily greener on the other side. It'll be incredibly unsettling for that playing squad. I mean, it's very rare that players would come out the way they have and publicly talk about them backing the manager in the context where there's speculation about him being sacked. Each of the players has said it in I think, an appropriate way, but they've just honestly answered the question. They've not tried to be diplomatic and not answer the question. So, you know, I just think players like Bergvall and Gray and Udogie and these young players who have, and you know, and Porro, these players who have gone through hell and back this year, I think he's become as not just their manager, but like a father figure to them. So I think it will create a really difficult environment for a new manager to sort of pick up the pieces from that. There's, you know, room. It's hard to retain players in those circumstances. You know, I think Romero might be out of contract after next season, and I think personally, I think we'll go backwards 7 or 8 years. I just think it'll create a real schism, a really difficult period for the club, more than we've seen. And be careful what you wish for is really my message there. Yeah, very true. I know you asked me this question earlier about have Spurs lost any FA Cup finals up to 91. We did actually lose the 87 one, 3-2 to Coventry, but we all want to forget that one. Yeah, we'll put that one aside though. I think up to 82 we won all 8 that we'd played in. And then of course we won in 91. So I suppose if that means that we'd won 9 out of 10, if that's the stat, up to and including 1991. That is the magic of Tottenham right there. Yeah.
Adrian, Romero's got 2 years left on his contract. So what do you make of his future? Because he has criticised the board. He did this season, which didn't go down well at the football club. But, you know, I feel like he said a lot of things that a lot of fans feel. He is, you know, he's got a great relationship with Ange Postecoglou. That is very evident. And a lot of reports have come out and said, particularly in Argentina, that Romero would want to leave Spurs if Ange Postecoglou does go, which I think would be another big problem for Spurs, because even Ange come out and said, you know, you don't want to be losing players like this. How on earth do you replace them? I know there's other reports in England coming out saying that, you know, Spurs put a bid in for Mark Gay of Crystal Palace. You know, in my opinion, an exceptional defender, would fit in very well at Tottenham, but apparently he doesn't want to move to Spurs this coming summer. So What do you make of the relationship that he has, Ange Postecoglou, with the players? Because even today, I don't know whether you've seen it, Pedro Porro answered a number of questions about winning the Europa League. He wasn't even asked about Ange Postecoglou, but some of his answers included talking about the manager so favourably, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, by the way, because a team that finishes 17th in the Premier League table with 22 league defeats, you don't normally get players coming out, giving, great comments about the manager. They're normally feeling pretty down about it. Yeah, we won the Europa League, but every single player seems to be very much behind Ange. And I know there will be a lot of fans, and I've seen on my channel as well, where people will go, well, the players are not exactly going to come out and say the manager's rubbish and they want him gone. But some of these things have been said, completely unprompted.
Yeah. Yeah, I think and you get that sense they've just, they've sort of just answered the question honestly, or in the case of Porro, he's just kind of segued into that. My sense is there's probably a little bit of maybe led by Romero and others who clearly are strongly supportive of Ange. There may have been some talk in the dressing room about players taking the opportunity to be really vocal about their support for the manager. It's always difficult for a player because you're an employee of the club, you're not an employee of the manager. So players typically steer clear of this stuff, but it's been fascinating to see how many players have expressed themselves in those terms. When I think about, sorry, Chris, I've got post-traumatic stress disorder from the injury crisis. When I think about this notion that we were, sorry to hark back on this point, but it taps into this sort of relationship the players have with their manager, Postecoglou. After everything we went through in December, January and February with that injury crisis, and then we started to get players back, and we very, very carefully and gingerly managed Van der Ven, really playing him once every maybe 3 games, and Romero playing only half a game, and all of it, and Udogie the same. That key 4 set of defenders, apart from Porro, who seems to be like a Marvel Comics superhero. He seems to never get injured. We carefully managed those players to the Europa League final, and then in the lead up to that final, in short succession, we lost Bergvall, we lost Maddison, and we lost. I'm just now forgetting who the third midfielder was. And Kulusevski. In that fateful sort of knee clash that he had in that sort of unnecessary, sort of just kind of random moment. And not only that, there were big question marks about whether Son was going to come up, whether his injury was going to be sufficiently sort of settled down to be able to get back into the side in time for the Europa League final. So when I think about even in that lead up to that Europa League final, the achievement to just keep that group of players together. And here you had, after the final, we've all seen the images of James Maddison and the emotion. And here's a player who didn't play in that final. And when you're a number 10, those finals are the set piece for defining your career. Yeah. We know of Maradona in the 86 World Cup. We know of Platini in the 84 European Nations Cup, and so on. We've got all these, extraordinary players who played number 10. So when you're coming into a big final, that sets the scene for those creative players to change the game in half a second with some flourish of magic. And that is the type of player that James Maddison is. He had to endure not being able to experience that. Same with Kulusevski, similar type of player, different but similar in a sense. And then, of course, Bergvall having achieved so much to develop the way he did and take his opportunity when he got it this season, for him to miss out as well with his injury. To see the emotion, and particularly the Maddison emotion. Maddison, the other thing is, when you looked at Maddison on the field after that with the tears and the embrace of Sonny, and that conversation, facing each other with, both of them crying. Yes, I understood. Sonny had been at the club for a decade. That was the destiny he'd been chasing. For him to have then become captain of the club in the club's first European trophy win for 41 years, that whole story is a fairy tale for us as supporters and for him because of being such a loyal servant. James Maddison has only been at the club for 2 seasons, and he didn't play in that final.
Yeah.
For him to have expressed the emotion that he expressed in those minutes after the game with his teammates, and particularly in that embrace with Sonny, and the way he spoke about the manager in and around that final, in the lead up and around that final, and what it meant to him. I mean, it's demonstrably something special has gone on there among that group of players and their connection with that manager. This is why I say it's in some ways more art than sport with Tottenham. There's something Shakespearean about it. There's something beautiful about it that goes beyond 11 players and a ball on a field. And that's the legacy of Tottenham. The question for Tottenham is, what is our destiny? Our history is that kind of flashy, beautiful uncertainty. The question is, what is our destiny? I think those players are bought into a different destiny for the club, one that has us winning league titles. And, a number of your followers, when I talked about these things after the Fulham game, a lot of the comments under the video were that I was delusional. And no doubt in the despair after that loss and how horrible our form was. Quite right, people quite right to say I was delusional, but hey, we won the Europa League. And you asked me early in the season, Adrian, do you think we'll win a trophy this year? And if so, which one? I said, I think we'll win the Europa League. So I'm going to come back to the word, which is the title of the song, which is Believe. And I just have my fingers crossed that common sense will prevail and we will seize this moment of glory to use as a springboard for a glorious future.
I think that's the question I've asked the guest the most, Adrian. Do you think we'll win a trophy this season? And at last, it's finally here. It's been brilliant. I'm so glad me and you aren't in the pub, actually, because I don't know how many pints we would have got through talking about Spurs. And I know, people like you, I could talk to all day long about Tottenham, which, we've got to have you back on the podcast again very soon, Adrian. Is there anything that we haven't covered today that you wanted to say or anyone that we haven't spoken about that you want to talk about?
No, I think that's all. I'll keep singing this song, and as I said, the Tottenham Believers song, which is called Believe, inspired by the words of Ange Postecoglou in a press conference in his first season. We will stand on the highest ground. It's the first line of the song. It'll be out on all streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, in the coming days. Look out for it. And here's my hope is that Ange will continue to manage the team next season, and I'm actually going to put out a little karaoke version of this song as well on Spotify and Apple Music as well. It's all ready to go. If anyone who likes the song, get together in a little group and put that on in the background and sing it. Video yourself and sing it together. Chris, what's your email address, Chris, for fans?
tottenhamfanchris@gmail.com. Get in touch.
Right. Get a video of yourself singing Believe with your family or your mate or your mates at the pub. Send it through to Chris, and maybe we can have many versions from supporters who are believers in this project to sing this song and give it a life, and maybe it'll be a song that we can sing when we win league titles in the years to come under Ange Postecoglou.
Wow, what a way to finish. Adrian, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you again, and look forward to having you back on the podcast very soon.
Thanks, Chris. All the best. Come on, you Spurs.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening. And to play you out is Believe.
We will stand on the highest and we'll sing our Spurs to glory for the dream we share.